First, let me thank you.
Okay.
Okay, why not? Do you want me to show the video?
Yeah, because President Zuba will come and then
Okay.
we
So which
should
means,
share it.
yeah. No, I didn't share. You want me to share?
Vele ukuthi izona ivule
Uh-huh.
because yona izoqala
Yeah, but
video.
I can see this is the video.
Okay.
This is the presentation.
So khona-ke.
Yeah, yeah, I will share.
James? 1 minute late. I go ahead.
Yeah.
Am I online?
Yeah.
Good morning. Sanbonani. Goeiemôre. Dumelang. Awucheni. Molweni. Colleagues, it is with true pleasure that I welcome you to this important leg, important installment, important part of our onward march as an institution, as the University of Zululand, as we continue to do what we have to do, what we can do, what we need to do to walk our talk, to bring to pass, to make real our determination to be a node for African thought. I'm happy. It's been one of the true pleasures of my experience at this university and my intellectual journey and my academic career to be part of this, of course, with all of you. So I'm glad to be here again, and I'm really, really pleased, privileged, and honored to be with you this morning. I'd like to recognize in absentia the Vice Chancellor of the University of Zululand, Professor Koliswam Tose, members of the Council, members of the university's executive management, our guest speaker, who is much a guest as he is one of us, Professor Siepe, our deans, in particular the Dean of the hosting faculty, Commerce, Administration and Law, Professor Krelin, our deputy deans, directors, especially the director of the Richards Bay campus, Professor George Moyo, HODs, senior colleagues, both those who are here in person and those who are joining us online. And I see we already have over 17 colleagues online. We thank you for coming. We are pleased to have you, and we look forward to an exciting and stimulating intellectual engagement over the next 3 days, from today, tomorrow, and on Thursday. Without wasting further time, I apologize. We were about 1 minute late. We started about a minute late. Please blame me for that. But don't do anything to my salary, please. I hope HR people are not here. I would now like to invite to the podium to give us the opening the Dean of the Faculty of Commerce, Administration and Law, Professor Lorraine Hrelin. Prof. Hrelin.
Good morning, all the colleagues in here in the venue, as well as the colleagues that is online. I would like to welcome you. First of all protocol observe. I'm not going to repeat everything that our director said so elegantly, But I would like to welcome our guest speakers, and that is Professor Sihepi, Prof. Moyo, and Prof. Brown. And then please do not forget Professor Akamponde that is leading us at the university in this endeavor that we are doing. Very welcome in here at Faculty of Commerce, Administration and Law. Colleagues, the university has taken this bold step during the reformulation of our mission and vision and our strategic goals to start up with this whole concept of an African university in Africa for Africans, by African, for African knowledge. And it is a very bold step in terms of recognition of the status of the university in the country as well as international. We started off in one of the major themes is a node for African thought. Again, what a wonderful initiative for this new vision that we have for the university, to see ourselves as the place where we get together and we share African knowledge and we create African knowledge and we go back and the created knowledge, we put this back on the forefront in this. And I was thinking about this for a very long time in terms of, is this necessary? What is the need? Will it be successful? Why are we doing this? Etc. And there was a lot of things that bothered me thinking back on a very, very long career maybe it's just Professor Chawari that is also here in the audience that has a longer career than me in academia. But thinking back on nearly 45 years in higher education and the knowledge that we gained and the knowledge that we created and the knowledge that we transfer to students and the knowledge that we expose students to. Is that the only knowledge that is available? And it was something that I'm very, very privileged to experience late in my career. This opportunity of thinking critically about the knowledge that I was exposed to and that we are exposing our students to. And what is there? What else is available? What is there that is more available? Now, I immediately want to say that when this idea came on the table and we started to discuss this in the faculty, a lot of people would ask me, but what must we do? Where do we start? Is it different? What is going on? And my answer to everyone is, and I don't have the perfect answers, that is why we have the workshop, to learn from the experts and to learn from the best. But the one thing that I want to say is, I think we should be open for change. If we have to say, where do we start? We have to say, I am willing to change. And I will tell you what is the willingness to change. If you think about our experience, we are living in the southern hemisphere, but we are teaching everything that is created in the northern hemisphere. It's two total different systems. If you just think about the weather, we don't have the system of a country that is halfway or 1.5 meters under snow for the winter. We have this moderate climate, and climate is a very big determinant in terms of growth and development and what you specialize in and what you don't specialize in. So now again, we're starting to take theories from the north and we're applying it on the southern hemisphere that is not applicable to us because we don't have to plan exactly the same way. If you look at the population spread in the northern hemisphere versus the southern hemisphere, it's totally different. If you look at the population age, because between the southern hemisphere, and I'm not even speaking about Africa, I'm just now speaking about southern, it's totally different from the northern hemisphere. For instance, my specialty is economics. The VC always teach me that I can just speak economics. It is true. But when we look at population structures, the northern hemisphere has massive problems with an aging population, with not enough new children in the system to take over. And they are going to run into massive problems after a while. Whilst we have a young population, more children or younger, different theories, different knowledge, different applications. So again, we cannot just take the theories from the north and apply it on the south. Then, in terms of Africa, we sit with this concept of a very rich continent, resource-rich continent. And I know it's one of my favorite theories to quote. But still, we sit with a continent where there's the paradox of poverty, the paradox of few. We have this abundance of natural resources, but the way that we use it and utilize it and work it and refine it is not creating enough richness for the whole country. Why? Because we are taking the theories and the knowledge of the North that doesn't have this abundance of resources. They have to look for different methodologies and different ways of producing. They need different knowledge because they don't have the same resources that we have. So why are we applying the wrong information in this? I can quote to you the whole history of economics, from the mercantilist right through to the newest ones. And they all come from Scotland or the UK, and some of them, the later ones, from the US. There's no history of economic thought in here from the southern part. There is not one single economist that contributed to this discourse in terms of what's happening. What are we taught? 1652, 3 little wooden ships that I think by the time that they landed there on the beach somewhere, they must have been worn out after so much months of wind and sea and no fresh water, etc. I don't think it's not a smart ship that ended up here. And then that is the start of the history of South Africa or Africa. That is nonsense. How can it be? Who did they exchange with? Where did the production that they exchanged with, where did it come from? How was it organized? We don't know anything about that knowledge. On top of that, we are confronted with the culture of other that's displaying their movies and their YouTube and their TikTok and everything, and that suddenly becomes our culture. We don't know anything about the culture. We are confronted with there's only one language that we are supposed to speak, and that is English. But that is not the most spoken language in the world. French and Spanish is more spoken than English, for instance. So who said that English is the only language to be spoken, and that if you don't speak English, then you, well, uncultured or untrained or uneducated? I don't know what it's called. So this is just the background in terms of this note for African thought, that we need to start thinking critically about what we are confronted with, what we are taking as the truth. Because I think I've tried to explain to you that there's so many limitations in terms of that knowledge. Now, what is our big advantage? Our big advantage is that we already know that information. We already know all the Northern Hemisphere. We already know all of these theories. We were confronted with this for years. We know this. That is our knowledge base. And it is easy to think critically about something if you already have some knowledge in place. Now we can take that knowledge, and I don't say we will ever throw it away, because you need to be a balanced person. You have to be confronted with both. We can't just say, well, we are only looking at the Southern Hemisphere, African knowledge, South African knowledge. That is not good enough. We have to place it in context, but we already have the context. But what we need to do is to sit down and to think critically about this, and to start to bring in our own knowledge, what we know, what our people know, what our students know. The language, we should never, ever neglect our language. And I'm very glad that UniZulu decided to take English and Zulu as equal partners in terms of the language policies. Because I'm Afrikaans speaking, and I can see how Afrikaans as an indigenous language is just disappearing as well. The same thing. Is this right? No, it's not, because it's a knowledge base that we are missing in this. But now I want to speak and ask the speakers today, please forgive the Faculty of Commerce, Administration and Law if we don't have all the philosophy that is the background or the backbone of this discussion. We are a Faculty of Commerce, and we try to quantify everything. So we are going to tell you, but only so many percentage people are writing and reading this instead of doing this. The lawyers are going to tell me, but case number so-and-so, you know what, prove this differently. So we are very, very excited as a faculty to be part of this node for African thought, and to bring this and to open this door for our students to share their knowledge with us, to go home, to share the knowledge of the Gogos that is not been written up, the culture, the stories, the plays, the games, everything that we are looking for. We have so much to contribute to African thought, African knowledge. And we are really looking forward to today's discussion and work. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you so much, Prof. Relin. Please, would you mind doing this one more time? She just took us right into the conversations: language, knowledge, space, the global north, the global south, the northern hemisphere. You know, but Prof, but you guys dazzle us. I mean, economists and commerce people. I think you actually rule the world much more than... My knowledge is little, but I don't remember the last time China invaded anywhere. But China is causing so much panic amongst the people who have the bombs today. So I think that tells us the power of economics these days. So you are as hugely important in all of this as anybody else, I guess. Not to mention that you have the legal people as well. I see my colleague Heidi there, so I'm very careful what I say, because I don't have legal representation, so I don't know what will happen after this. So you are hugely, massively important, and equally, no less important than the philosophers and those who have very fancy language to say. Your percentages, they dazzle people as much as the densest philosophical. When you say, no, it's GNI. I mean, if there's growth of 2% of GNI over 6 years, and if the bond yields are going to be compounded, we lost already. We don't have no idea what you're saying. Yeah. So thank you very much for that. Colleagues, it's with great pleasure that I would like to now introduce our guest speaker. In the meantime, I learned somewhere that it's not a very bad idea for the program director to introduce himself. My name is Agogo Akpome. I'm an associate professor in the Department of English there at Ongoye main campus. So that's where I come from. And I know many of you, and it's been a great pleasure to share the same campus and the same institution with you over these few years. And now, we are going to have our chief facilitator, our guest speaker, Professor Sipo Siepe, who, as we all know, was until recently the Deputy Vice Chancellor Institutional Support here at UniZulu. He is a higher education and strategy consultant, and people still find it surprising that he's actually a physicist by training, holding 2 master's degrees in physics from the University of Witwatersrand and in technology in education from Harvard University, Cambridge, Massachusetts, USA. He holds a PhD also from the University of Northwest and is a recipient of several scholarships, the most prestigious being the Harvard Fellowship and the Senior Research Fulbright Fellowship. Before returning to the academy, which means he left the academy at a time, he served as special advisor in a number of ministries, in public service, in administration, in human settlement, communications, defense, and military veterans. Professor Siepe is a former associate political editor and columnist for the Mail and Guardian, and his scholastic contribution includes at least these 2 publications. One is 2020 on Masking the Politics of Mass Deception, published by African Century Editions, and a 2020 book which he edited, Tertiary Institutional Transformation in South Africa Revisited. Colleagues, it's my pleasure to bring to the podium Professor Sipo Siepe.
Colleagues, in the interest of time, I'm going to move straight into what we should be grappling with. And as Professor Crane sort of intimated, we intend to make this to be more of an exciting, but it will probably be a little bit bumpy because of the pace with which we are going to do this. The approach would have been that I'll give the first intervention, where I make a number of remarks in terms of what we're about. Then the second will then be followed by a conversation with colleagues on what has been presented more as a form of roundtable. We're going to change gear a little bit. By first, I'll make my introductory remarks. Then thereafter, I would invite the Vice Chancellor, who has recorded a presentation that she made some time back, to give you a bird's eye view. And this bird's eye view, it's almost what some people call a panoramic view in terms of how far we are going to be going and what are the challenges that we're going to face as scholars. So for that, after she has made that representation, Professor Akpome, myself, and Professor Moyo will try to tease out the key elements of that. But they also hopefully inviting you also to intervene in terms of what are you getting from the VC, because this is an institutional project, and I want to emphasize that. It is not something that we do because we found time. The fact that we have sought to ensure that the faculties find at least time off from the teaching while they still, or put this way, that they could find some time to say, can we put our minds to this, is an expression of the commitment that this university has embarked on. But this commitment is part of the broader challenge of this country. It starts first with recognition that we are transitioning, even though it's 30 years down the line. 30 years down the line is a, a little time compared to what we've been exposed to for the last 300 to 400 years. But it is still very critical to understand that we have to start somewhere. Hence, the program director was referring to the notion of the onward march towards turning this university into a node for African thought. But I just want to emphasize that this is a project that finds expression in the thinking of this country. It finds expression in the policy documents, even higher education, where there's a promise that come the new dispensation, then we're going to restructure and transform all our system, because we come from systems of oppression and suppression to a movement where we are going to experience what we can call not only political freedom, but we're talking about also cultural freedom. We're also talking about epistemic freedom. We're talking about epistemic justice. So this is a challenge that is not only institutional, it is national, but most importantly, it is also continental and planetary. The issues that we're dealing with are being grappled with by many other people all over the world who are crying out or crying for epistemic justice, which also boils down to the right to be. So that is a point that one must understand, that this is now going to be our core business. Is going to be a project that should shape our consciousness, our intellectual consciousness. We'll be talking about intellectual imperialism. We'll be talking about the cognitive empire. We're going to talk about the empires of the mind. What do they mean and how do they impact on us? We're going to talk about the coloniality of power. How do the project, what chances does it stand? And Professor Hreling put it more in a question: will it succeed? And that is a very important question. And when you ask that question, it should actually brace yourself for the bigger struggle. You start there from the position of doubt to say, how do I move from the question of will it succeed to where it must and should and will succeed. That is the challenge that we are facing. And it's not the struggle that starts now. Many scholars in Africa have always grappled with the idea of creating an African university. If you go back to 1972, when there was a first conference by African scholars organized by Yusufu in Nigeria, one of the things that emerged from that book that he put together was really on creating an African university. So this is what you may call a yearning of decades, a yearning of centuries. So what, in short, Professor Moyo, we're talking about moving from where we defined ourselves or were defined as historically disadvantaged. Maybe we still are. But what we want to do is to move from what appears to be extinction to distinction, where we are very different, deliberately so, where we mark our territory. And this is what we are saying, this is the contribution that we can make. This is about moving from the colonial era to a decolonial and post-colonial era. And what are the responsibilities of universities in that transition from colonialism to post-colonialism? It is really about how do we move from cognitive capture to epistemic freedom. It is about moving from being defined by others to defining ourselves and charting a way forward. It is about what we're saying about not being a university in Africa, but being a truly authentic African university. What does that mean? Because let's not beat about the bush. All institutions that were created under colonialism were meant to serve the colonial project. And if you don't even know, all institutions that were built in South Africa are products of a colonial era and colonial mindset and colonial imaginations, including apartheid imagination. They were all imbued with the understanding of the categorization that had been put there about who will live and how they will live and where they will live without those people even having a right. So you need to understand that this is about justice. And this struggle is a critical struggle that whose time has come. And I'm putting this sharply because not all struggles can be waged at the same time. If people knew of Kwame Nkrumah, he talked about first to seek the political freedom, and then he thought everything would follow. But we have followed as that template, that it was always easy to get what you call the political freedom. But all other freedoms have not been met in the continent and in other countries that were colonized. So it is exactly what Mandela said when in his book, Long Walk to Freedom, when he said, I have walked that long walk to freedom. I've tried not to falter. I have made some missteps along the way. But I discovered a great secret, that after climbing a great hill, one discovers that there are many more hills to climb. The Mandelas, the Sisulus, the Tambos, and many others, they did climb one hill. And they've passed the baton to all of us to say, once you get there, you discover that there are many more hills to climb. This is our responsibility. In the same way that Mandela did say that when he was a young person, and after listening to the stories that were presented by the parents who used to congregate within the village, and they talk about the bygone times, and they talk about the heroes of the anti-colonial heroes. And he said, I wished that history would be so kind that I could be part of that. So in a sense, history has imposed that responsibility of climbing a hill, a different hill, on all of us. And the failure is not an option. And we are emboldened in this by the fact that whereas in the past, African countries individually were fighting for the same notion of epistemic justice and epistemic freedom, now there is a global movement that finds expression in the Roads Must Fall, Black Lives Matter, and many other struggles that you find not only in this country, in Europe, in South America, in Japan, in the Americas, that where people have said, this is a time for us to fight all forms of oppressions and discrimination. And we should not mislead ourselves that because the cause is right, it's going to be easy. We should not mislead ourselves, or we should abuse ourselves of the notion that because this is a righteous struggle, it will be an easy struggle. And some people have actually said, if we thought the political struggle was difficult, we ain't seen nothing yet. So this is and what the Vice Chancellor will be presenting here is almost a sense of what type of mindset we should have, and also what sort of challenges we are going to encounter. And the other question related to that, which was somehow insidiously or Nicodemously put in by Professor Kreeling, was the notion of, after all that I've learned, what do I do with that information? And what does it mean? And it comes on to what we will later deal with, that all the knowledge that we've had, that is largely Western, has undergone a process of exhaustion. It is no longer able to assist us in resolving the challenges of our time. The whole convergence of crisis, I mean, whether you talk about the global financial crisis of 2008, which with all our understanding of economics, we should have been able to predict, but we failed. COVID-19, you're talking about climate change. The knowledge that we have acquired should have been able to help us. Right now, we're talking about the possibility of the end of life as we know it. So the convergence of this crisis indicate that there's a problem. Professor Green, one of the governors of the bank in England, highly educated, PhD Oxford. When there was a global crisis, he was asked by politicians that how do you explain that we got caught up in this? Because most of you, because we're so far away, we did not even get a sense of the impact of that global crisis. But it was a total reset, to an extent that the number of about 8 countries in Europe had to be bailed out. Remember the lines where people could not get even $50 from the machines. That's how terrible. Then when he was asked, he then went to explain how it happened. And he was told that your job was not to explain the crisis, but to prevent it. So if effectively what they were saying, with all your knowledge, highly qualified, decorated, you couldn't. And they said, on the basis of that, you are fired. Now we shall move to try to get the VC's direction in this before I make my own input. And I would like folks to listen to it because she took time to think this through. And some of the things that you may find may be greater challenge conceptually, but they are also indicating the direction in which we're going to take. And we are looking at the possibility where we will be judged by the extent to which we participate in this project, because this project is part of our strategic plan at the university. And it's also a project that, if you remember, it was opened by the Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation. With that, the VC speaks.
First, let me thank you, Professor Siepe, for being the master of ceremony this morning, or the chair, as they call it academically. University of Zululand Faculty of Council, Ms. Ellen Kaluza, all members of University Council, executive members, my team, my A team, management committee, members, staff and students of University of Zululand, Professor Siepe, as the chairperson of this session, Professor Ndlovu, who will act as a respondent this morning. I greet you all and thank you for joining this webinar. In welcoming you to today's session, I would like to extend an invitation to us to peer deep into disciplinary positionalities that define our academic practices. I believe this exercise is necessary if we are to build a vanguard for African thought capable of confronting the epistemic violence of the global north, for which years has entrapped academia around the world within a form of disciplinary culture. Moreover, By exploring the terrain of disciplinarity debate, I hope to whet your appetite for today's topic. By our important and very eloquent guest speaker, Professor Bewaji. Moreover, by exploring the terrain of the disciplinary debate, I've already said I hope to whet your appetite for today's topic by Professor Bewaji. My overall intention is to map the power dynamics embedded in the colonial disciplinary configuration of knowledge, and by extension, to point to lines of struggle leading to alternative decolonized knowledges and thoughts. I will start my presentation with the understanding disciplinarity. Scholars of disciplinary studies have claimed that most academic disciplines are established in the 19th and 20th century. Europe and have become taken for granted almost as a natural way of ordering university knowledge. Yet, a close scrutiny of their present-day manifestations in universities, academic activities reveals tensions, contradictions, and possibilities. Although there is no single agreed definition of what academic disciplines are, scholars have come up with conceptions which allow us to explore the essential features of the phenomenon. Talman 2022 believes that, on one view, that disciplines are, open quote, social and epistemological entities that make up distinct knowledge domains based on particular forms of inquiry and theoretical outlooks, but also social domains that present the members of a discipline with a shared set of values and practices, unquote. In similar vein, Parole 2022 contends that, open quote, disciplines are manifestations of norms associated with a particular ways of organizing learning and the systematic production of knowledge, setting the boundaries of what might be taught, close quote. From the foregoing definitions, 3 points can be made. The first is that academic disciplines consist of predefined epistemological or knowledge-producing models that offer proven ways of knowledge production and dissemination. Academic practitioners get socialized in this regime, leading to a tendency to take disciplinarity as unquestionable, as something that he or she, or that those things have always existed, external and internal, and are not to be changed. Disciplinary boundaries are then set and policed through various mechanisms, which include conceptual frameworks, standards, norms, etc., to legitimize positions and the roles of members of disciplines. The second point concerns the idea of community and identity. Disciplines are typically sustained by networks of academic or community of scholars, distinguished by their distinct epistemic repertoires encompassing, among others, epistemological beliefs, theories, and terminology. It is argued that members of disciplinary community are drawn together by their commitment to and invest in various epistemic repertoires. Disciplinary committees of practice are also maintained through disciplinary infrastructure, such as education program, academic departments in universities. Success within a well-established disciplinary norms and practices confers status and influence on academics, as well as identity formation. Finally, some scholars have, However, taken the issue with the apparent statistic depiction of academic disciplines implied in two definitions. They post that within each discipline or subfield, there is often a considerable amount of epistemic heterogeneity and dynamism. As members of the disciplines engage in academic practices, new orientations may emerge, which may exist alongside established ones, or maybe insulated from and in opposition to them. When viewed this way, disciplines as heterogeneous and dynamic meaning, that even disciplinary training and border policing may not achieve that compliance from members of disciplines. This also means that disciplinary boundaries are permeable. I now move to my second or third point, to disciplinarity and its prefixes beyond disciplinary boundaries. For centuries, the order of knowledge has been framed according to disciplinary boundaries. In recent years, there's been increasing questioning on the rationale and legitimacy of disciplinarity. The debates have given rise to multiplicity of qualifying prefixes to which the term discipline has been subjected. Among the most important include mono, inter, multi, transposed. Those are the four levels. And what it shows in my presentation, if I were to show you, it shows that the movement from monodisciplinarity to post-disciplinarity, what it entails. The disciplinarity prefixes can be thought as occurring along this continuum from monodisciplinarity to post-disciplinarity, of all which show different degrees of movement beyond disciplinary boundaries. And I think this is some of the things that I was discussing with the GBC yesterday as to how to approach this era of African thought and African knowledge, and how to position the disciplines within the university, which is why Professor Bawaj is sitting here. Each disciplinary prefix conveys conceptual and practical shifts along this continuum and can be judged in terms of how far it is from either the polar extremes. Hugerson and van der Laan, 2021, Debalay, 2019, they summarize meanings of various types of disciplinarities, namely monodisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, and post-disciplinarity. It must be noted that the above taxonomy is not exhaustive. It gives a bird's eye view of the complex debate about disciplinarities to which there is no consensus. And we must summon that, because that's exactly what is going to happen, and that's what scholarship is about. It, however, offers a vantage point for reflection and deeper engagement on the roles we, as academics, and the university systems plays in a broader decolonization project. Out of this sober perspective, strategies for disobeying colonial discipline containment and for crafting of way forward-looking alternatives can emerge. Now, on point of framing alternatives to colonial disciplinarities, the decision to develop UniZulu as a node for African thought is one of the strategies for resisting different kinds of colonialities of power that have subjugated academia for centuries. Indeed, in exploring the taxonomy of disciplinarities, this fact becomes apparent in this connection as we strategize towards achieving cognitive justice. Lichai and Fathagen, 2014, raise a permanent point. They argue that the characteristics of the power or strategy relation affect the kinds of resistance that should be deployed. That being the case, it then becomes apparent or important to work out what kinds of resistance are appropriate or what kinds of power tentacles within the disciplinarities. In other words, there is no need to think about how, for example, chilled or inclusionary disciplinary knowledge boundaries or disciplinary epistemic repertoires can be effectively resisted. Growing decolonial scholarship has generated a substantive body of narratives that seek to counter the prevailing Eurocentric scholarship and create alternative and inclusive worldviews that should be reflected in the Global South University curricular offerings. I cover these main points, categories that are broader thinking and shifting of borders, disciplinary activism, transcendence and transgression, and epistemic communities, as I will be outlining below. Border thinking and shifting borders narrative. Abdullah 2021 has argued that the one way out of disciplinary containment is border thinking, a decolonial concept which focuses on changing the terms of conversation about the knowledge as well as disciplinary content. For Abdullah, border thinking locates its inquiry on the very borders of the systems of thought and reaches towards possibility of non-Eurocentric models of thinking. It also acknowledges the existence of other epistemologies, knowledges, and understandings towards pluriversal world, a world where many words fit. In similar vein, Sonetti and others, 2022, propose a rewriting of boundaries between disciplines, arguing that doing so is not a matter of producing new knowledge, producing new individual ways of thinking, but of a new mindset or set of attitudes to be constructed in true inclusive perspectives. The second point is disciplinary activism narrative. In a study designed to support South Africa academics decolonize the curricula following the 2015 hashtag Roads Must Fall student campaigns. The Harry League and others called for dynamics to enact agency as disciplinary activists to disrupt artificial disciplinary boundaries. The study questioned how academics who have been disciplined to think and act in ways that do not necessarily enable epistemic and ontological access to freedom can free themselves from colonial practices by disrupting or delinking their practices from colonialism of knowledge. Being the power and operating colonial disciplinarities can serve as a catalyst for constructive social and academic change through the redesign of curriculum, which is where we are, Professor Nomlong. To this end, the authors identified 3 sites of disruption: of the researcher as a person, the researcher as a teacher within the academy, and the researcher as a specialist within a particular discipline. The third point is transcendence and transgression narrative. It has been argued that another way of challenging colonial disparity configurations is through transcendence and transgressions. With regard to the transcendence, which also appears in the transdisciplinarity and post-disciplinarity discourses, the focus is on the need to develop new overarching frameworks that replace the old ones and aim to develop pragmatic and value-based unity worldviews. Closely related to this inclusivity stance Transgression narratives seek to break hierarchical views of knowledge, acknowledging multiple voices, and to position oneself outside the limits of what was considered reliable knowledge. The fourth one, being the last one, is epistemic communities narratives. Just as communities of practice are formed around exclusionary colonial disciplinary boundaries, subscribing to and controlled by a set of disciplinary epistemic repertoires, so can alternative and inclusive epistemic communities be formed. There's a proposal from scholars that the notion of relational epistemic communities as spaces where academics and other social embedded knowers can establish true dialogue of knowledges. A space where knowledge is co-produced by interaction of mosaic epistemologies, inherent in cultural and ethnic heterogeneity. Members of epistemic communities, I quote, are bounded by shared commitments to embrace inter-ontological dialogues and to produce socially robust knowledge and understood as a process more than the final product, close quote. The main message in this definition is that to decolonize universities, we must relook at service and engagement with communities, as well as force deep partnerships with members of the society we serve. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize that our pursuit for the vision to create a node of African cultural tourism can be enhanced by adopting an active, reflexive stance where we interrogate our own positionalities as defined by the colonial disciplinary pigeonholes from where we were. We should also recognize how universalized disciplinarities shape our identities and academics and develop, as well as deploy discourses that will shape our actions to create alternative, inclusive epistemic communities that will derive the privileging of African or marginalized epistemologies. Finally, I hope I have highlighted the limitations and possibilities of trying to impact decolonization from within and with the academy. With these reflections, I wish you a fruitful on horseback deliberations, and I thank you.
Very much for invigorating presentation. Let me also say, yeah, I said as a point of entry, it would be important to listen to the VCs giving the marching orders. But I would also say, if a few years ago she were to give a presentation like this, she would have earned herself the right to be fired on the spot. There is no better way of writing your own dismissal than what she had actually presented. Because what she is actually saying is whereas we want to build or create a sense of finality or conclusion in whatever we do, what she's actually doing is to create doubt in that which we do. So this is a presentation of that you could say it's in celebration of doubt. And in celebration of doubt means that we must be ready for the battles ahead, because everybody has subscribed to. It's like telling people of a particular religion that they must shift from that religion. We are a tribe that has its own beliefs as academics. We are a tribe that has its own processes. We are a tribe that would be able to use our processes to exclude, because that is what we call the need for boundaries. So that you say, no, but Professor Sepe, this does not belong in physics. It sounds more like witchcraft. You go out, you exclude. Mm, That, that is the reason why you have a disciplinary boundaries to be able to say. But what you was also saying is that there's a new scholarship that is emerging that creates possibilities. That actually the mark of universities must be really based on celebration of doubt. Because all traditions that have succeeded are traditions that have allowed themselves to review and restate their positions. And what is presented here is precisely that element that we need to explore the disciplinary debate. Because if we don't, then you are not going to be able to move towards what we're talking about. Because what we've been about and where we're going are two different things. This one calls for a shift and a transition. The second aspect that she put at the beginning was this exercise that we're involved in. Yeah, this exercise we're involved in is really about creating a vanguard of thought. You're not going to go to a battle, any battle, without preparation. And hence they need to build a vanguard. So if we're going to talk about present ourselves as a note for African thought, then we must be able to be ready to engage the battles that may come. And then the notion of disciplines is also a few things that just a few remarks before I invite Professor Moyo and Professor Kume to just reflect a little bit on this, is that there are power dynamics and structures that promote a particular way of looking. And it says academics, and you know that yourself, that's what you do. Academics are socialized into disciplines. So when you have a vice chancellor saying, let us rethink, it means that you must actually, as you continue to be socializing others, how do you allow a space for them to grow and to see other possibilities? And so that is one thing that we need. There are places where the disciplines people have embraced the gospel that they are unquestionable. They don't even see any possibility. So if you're an accountant, you remain simply an accountant. You can't delve into something. But we know that with the challenges that we have in life, we have had, at least those of us in the sciences, were forced by the challenges that we face to move into transdisciplinary, into multidisciplinary, to deal with the challenges that we face. If you think about COVID cannot be 19 could not be solved simply by looking at the medical response. You had to think about behavioral. You have to think about society. You have to think about the number of things. And some people even brought in the military to try to deal with what you would consider normally a medical problem. So the challenges we face themselves impose a multi approach and multidisciplinary approach or transdisciplinary approach. So but you'll have those scholars that you may have to engage with, who for them the gospel of discipline is the only gospel. You also have to deal with the aspect that says not only are academics socialized into that, you also have communities of practice that have been built to sustain that understanding in that view of what the scholarship is all about. So again, the notion of tribes comes in. And it is these tribes that if somebody behaves, they will disfellowship that member. So we're talking here about academic communities, academic committees. You're talking about the professions themselves that will also. So what we're dealing here with is a no easy struggle, and we also know that for you to be promoted to be a professor, there is a disciplinary approach that we have accepted. So what does it mean for Professor Khalil if you now have somebody who thinks differently? So what the VC says is really that the challenges of today are too immense, that there's been an exhaustion of the approaches that we had, that right now we're moving from mono to inter to multi to trans and to post-disciplinary. So I thought that is the direction that she was actually putting, and says if we are going to embark on the note for African thought, we need to think beyond the boundaries, because those boundaries are shaped and were shaped by other people while we were not there, or while our views were not even considered. So, Professor Kume, maybe I should leave it here so for you to make one or two remarks, then, and Professor Moyo, then I'll move into my presentation.
Thank you very much. First to the Vice Chancellor in absentia for that presentation which we have relieved. And thank you very much, Prof. Siepe. I was fortunate, as I have been over the past 2 years, to be in most, if not all, of these presentations.
Don't stop.
I keep talking. Okay. Mr. Twala says I can keep talking. All right. Yes, and I remember that presentation on disciplinarity. I would start by saying that it's a very powerful presentation. It presents to us a kind of starting point, the way I understand it, to rethink dominant knowledges, dominant knowledge systems presented or generated, circulated, valorized, reinforced through the architecture of disciplines. And disciplines as received systems of engagement. They are handed down. It's a mold. Those who do, you make blocks and bricks. It's a mold that has been given to you. The parameters, that is, the boundaries have been set. And you are required, very much like one of the machines in a system, the conveyor belt system. The bottle comes from there, you pour in the drink, it goes there, you put in the cap. It's a system that renders many of the people in the process as automated, mindless participants. And that's the central argument. I'd like to take the Vice Chancellor a bit further. I didn't think of it in this way then, but what I'm going to say now comes from a work that I am doing right now. I'm trying to tease out African thoughts. It's a presentation I'll be making on Thursday. I'm working on it. And I use the opportunity to appeal to Prof. Siepe if he will, after that presentation, be able to look at what I'm doing. What if we think, the Vice Chancellor spoke of monodisciplines, interdisciplinary, post-disciplinary, transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approaches. And if we think about what the British theorist Lewis Gordon has reminded us of in his influential work, Disciplinary Decadence. What if we think in non-disciplinary terms? What if we go beyond, like we go outside the yard, beyond the pale? We just run out. I don't really understand cricket, but I know this part. I know that cricket fans are thrilled when the ball is pitched, right? Or bowled, or what do they call that? I don't know what it is. And then the ball just sails away from Ellis Park. It's on its way to Pretoria. And I know the crowd just goes, yay! What if we go outside the park and do it in a non-disciplinary way? And this is where what Prof. Siepe is saying about doubt and what the Vice Chancellor is saying about questioning comes. Are we willing to do that? I think it requires courage. From the perspective of someone involved in language, I'm very interested in disciplinary terminologies, the terms, the taxonomies, the naming systems, how, disciplinary, when we speak disciplinary, we can be very funny. We can tell people this is a crucible. It's not a plate. It's not a dish. It's not a mortar. Oh, but come on, it can be a mortar. It's a container. In another language, it is something else. This is what the literary theorist Homi Bhabha, who himself got fame for his very dense use of words. Himself and our other colleague, our compatriot, the Cameroonian South African, Achille Mbembe. Yeah, these guys can say nothing in 2 pages. They can just go on and give you the densest, the most impressive, the most bombastic, the highest sounding words and phrases that makes even the guy who just came fresh from a PhD in Oxford look stupid, trying to figure out what they are saying, when indeed what they are saying is zilch, nothing. And for me, that's how disciplinary repertoires work sometimes, the terminologies. And they tend to darken rather than enlighten. They tend to maybe conceal the ignorance of the speaker, the limits of the speaker. You're bringing more confusion rather than illumination. And I'll push this to Prof. Grayling. I think we're all economists. I say it with not in that sense, but if you have to balance your income, if you have to check and you have to go back to HR to say, excuse me, I was supposed to get a raise. Why is it down? If you go to ShopRite or you go to Woolworths and you get to the till and you say, no, excuse me, that should be 40 Rand. Why is it in 140? I think you're an economist. That kind of economist is what I mean. I don't mean I'm going to submit an application to your faculty any moment. But that happens sometimes. The economists come and they say very fancy things, especially in regard to economies in the global south, African economies. Oh no, this is what you should do. You should do export substitution. What we are telling you is that when we give out treasury bonds and then they go on and on and on and on, they actually tell you that the economy is doing great and you're out of job. And things are becoming more expensive. We were at one workshop in Johannesburg several years ago. We had these very brilliant guys from the World Bank and the IMF telling us how African economies are doing good. These proposals they are bringing, why we should keep doing them, praising those governments, but we have more unemployment, more poverty. Our kind of economy is like, excuse me, can we have more food? If we can have more food, if we are less hungry. So I think that's what, in a sense, if we take the argument, if we take the logic to the end, I think that's what the Vice Chancellor is saying. These terminologies, these ideas, do they make us understand? Are they helping us to solve real problems? Or they just make us ingratiate ourselves to the masters, to the lords of the discipline, and make ourselves liked, make ourselves invited, and gets our work cited? Do they solve problems? Are they real? Whatever you say in physics, whatever you say in law, Um, they say South Africa has a great constitution. Oh, fine, I like that. Is it making us have less crime? Are we having less infractions? Are we solving the crimes? If it is not, permit me to question the declaration that it's a great constitution. If it's not resolving the crisis the people have been in, permit me to question and permit me to request something extra or something else. Maybe a substitution or an extension or just something more than precisely what we have and what we've been dealing with. But I think it requires courage. I think it requires courage. I think and for us especially, if we want to bring it down to what we are going to do, because it's part of this workshop, when we go into class, do we have the courage? If we have reached the position, if we have reached the realization that the ideas, the theories, the disciplines, the existing knowledge architecture, the existing disciplinary terminologies are not working, do we have the courage to go to the border thinking? That's what the Vice Chancellor was also saying, and tweak or replace. You need to be where teachers of English are gathered when I heretically, insurgently suggest that, can we drop Shakespeare? I mean, like the colleagues are able to generate an earthquake to swallow you if you make that suggestion. I mean, but are we ready to do that? I think that's the challenge that's coming from this presentation. Are we ready to accept that these problems are not being solved? Or are we doing what dominant knowledge systems do? They give you a prescription, the prescription doesn't work, and then they do like the Sangoma. And Sangoma says, in my place we call them maybe the Babalao. The Babalao says, take this once every evening and you will be healed. After 6 days you will be healed. You come after 6 days, you are not healed. Did you take it outside? You didn't take it inside. But that's what dominant economies do. They have all these prescriptions and they come back to say why they didn't work. It's like while giving you the prescriptions, they have an answer to tell you if it doesn't work. Say, no, this is why it didn't work. And they're doing something else. I also think the economic field is a very powerful one. Prof. Krelin, I don't forget what you said in one of our very early seminars. You said something that sticks with me, and you said, we've been teaching all kinds of economics, all kinds of approaches. They don't seem to work. But the problem, as parts of the disciplines, don't we come back to say it didn't work because it didn't work with Jacob Zuma because he was corrupt? It didn't work with Cyril Ramaphosa because he was working with white monopoly capital. Why didn't it work with Mandela? I'll leave it there.
Morning, all. It's always good to be the last after the two giants have spoken. Do I need to say anything? Maybe I just need to go and sit down. Anyway, I'm a man of few words. I just want to pick up on one or two things. I don't want to belabor the point. The idea of celebration of doubt, which Prof. Siepe talked about, which connects to the need to use knowledge ecologies rather than disciplines. You know, I think we really should be moving towards what is called knowledge ecologies, wherever knowledge comes from, as long as we can use it to solve a problem. I think that's what we need. Now, this idea of doubt, we can see it in the top scientists in the world today. You know, like NASA, they are beginning to doubt a number of theories, like the Big Bang, Prof. Siep, because they sent a telescope the James Webb Telescope, which went there and began to discover some stuff that cast doubt on that theory. That's the way knowledge goes. And then also in social science, there's almost a natural coming together of knowledge ecologies. I don't like to call it disciplines. You know, now there's a lot of scholarship around, in social science, around quantum social theory. Can you imagine? Quantum social theory. And you had to see, quantum mechanics, quantum physics, it's the coming together. In other words, what we are saying is that the real life problems cannot be packaged into the disciplines, as the colleagues were saying. We are naturally forced to move, to cross the boundaries, to transgress or to disobey epistemic boundaries and move across. The other point I want to just to say is the idea of that knowledge expires. And also the VC spoke about the sides of disruption. How do we disrupt the way we think, our mindset? One of the sides of disrupting that is to begin to doubt yourself as an expert. Are you really an expert in your discipline in court? If top physicists can now begin to say, we have to revise our theories, it means that knowledge is not something that you can say, I know. You cannot say it is static. It's an ongoing process of discovery. It's an ongoing process of learning. That's why we see it expiring, because it's no longer explaining anything. My last point, I promise that I'm a man of a few words, is the idea of a community, epistemic communities. It links with the idea of a pluriverse world, that the world is pluriversal, and therefore there are knowledges that are there that can be harnessed, that can be utilized to address our everyday challenges. That's why curriculum, when we come to talk about curriculum, we talk about, there's a lot of scholarship now around what is called a pluriversal curriculum, a curriculum that accommodates different epistemologies. I could go on and on, but I don't want to belabor the point. I think we have said it. Let's doubt ourselves. We are not experts. We are all learners. Even Prof. Siepe calling me and Akpome, it doesn't mean that I may be saying a lot of nonsense, actually. Because I'm learning. I'm a learner. I'm a lifelong learner. That's how I want to see myself. Thank you.
Maybe quickly redesign this foundation. What do you want to do?
Don't leave, sir. Sorry, colleagues, we just need a minute to recalibrate the schedule because one or two things didn't come as we planned. So, sir. So, colleagues, on the program, we should have had the presentation. We conceived it as a single presentation by Prof. Siepe, but we wanted the Vice Chancellor here, by all means. So we got her here somehow. So that has disrupted the original program arrangement. So what we want to do, the 9:45 until 10:30 slot for question and answer, we will fit that in later. We'll figure a way to fit that in later. So Prof. Siepe will proceed with the rest of his presentation until 10:30 when we go for tea. I hope that works well for you colleagues and for the colleagues online. Thank you.
Yeah. Guys, I need to start looking at my presentation. And I'm doing this deliberately also as a way to, let me put differently. Prof. Khalil, I always marvel at my students. Well, it is the students in physics don't do that because physics, you cannot make easy acquaintance. So when you go into class, they take notes because it doesn't matter how much you read physics without the intervention of the professor or the lecturer, they will never understand it. So what you do find is that they would always insist on making sure that they're in class, that also when they're in class they take notes. I always marvel at some other students who can participate, be in the what's name in the classroom, and for some reason they are able to remember stuff just sitting and looking. That amazes me. And I'm still, I belong to your class and Professor Moyo's class where people take notes because you again doubt your ability to remember. But if you don't doubt your ability, then you must have a very photographic memory. And actually, I think we need people with that photographic memory because I can tell you, I've been in this business for as long as the last 40 years, 45 years, but I do take notes. Even if I don't think that the speaker is going to say something, what you often find that even if you don't agree with the speaker triggers a particular thinking. Actually, that element of disagreement, even it's also important. It's part of scholarship. So when we talk about socializing people into the academy, we also mean something like that. But I see that these days we do have different type of students, and who, for some reason, they have the capabilities that we don't have. Now, what I'm going to do here is to take you through the broader journey from the onset about the university so that you understand that this is the road that the university is now taking. We are embarking on moving from being defined as historically disadvantaged to very clear to say we are not going to allow other people to define us, but we are going to define ourselves. But we also understand that this is also part of the bigger challenge as a people, that we can't be in South Africa. You know, there's something that I find probably that is why Africa is where it is. The lack of excitement about ideas. You know, let me give you an example. When you had COVID-19 in this country and all globally, what, as a student of Harvard, I was getting reports on a daily basis about what the one institution is doing. On a daily basis, I was getting reports from the Massachusetts General Hospital that they now were partitioning the various levels of a hospital to make sure that this part is only for people who are affected by COVID. And we brought all the experts, the cardiovascular surgeons, we've got the guys dealing with hearing, we've got guys, because all they were trying to do is that we're faced with something that is unprecedented, where symptoms are seen in the morning, and in no time the person is dead. The speed with which people were dying, and so they brought every scholar in the medical field and related fields to be there on the daily, and I was getting that report. And after a few months, there was a breakthrough from Johns Hopkins Hospital and the university, where they were also doing that. What happened in Africa? Africa only came into the picture to complain that they are being deprived of vaccines. A whole continent of 1.3 billion. That's what we do. That's why this expression of lack of excitement about ideas is what you find when you go into the classrooms. So when we are not able to do that, it manifests itself in bigger forms. And that's why I'm saying that it's important that when we say the faculty gets out to find time, we are taking this very seriously. And people apply both it's a brains-on and hands-on type of intervention. And the next thing that we were saying in terms of the university posture, which will be the university for the next coming few years, and it will be the project of this university, is really to move into a brand new ecology of decolonization and self-determination. And in doing so, it will require that type of doubt, the intellectual interrogation, and also a quarrel with some untenable perspectives that have been there in our space. And this is the most important aspect that you find in our strategic thrust. It says the university has embarked on transforming itself into an authentic African university where epistemologists of the global south and the indigenous knowledges are privileged. As our contribution to the broader struggle for total emancipation of African people, we are taking bold, deliberate, and calculated steps to renegotiate and recontract with our local, provincial, national, continental, and planetary publics through a paradigm shift from the alienating colonial model. So this is the posture that the university is taking, and this is why it was important for the Vice Chancellor to give an opening address. And what we've done in the last few years, this gives you now the path we have traveled. When the study was adopted a few years ago, we then decided to have an inaugural international conference on decolonization, where a book was produced. And we also hope that these workshops will also culminate in a book that will come. Then 2023, then last year, we had also a workshop with the university leadership. And it was felt that it is important that we cascade this to the faculties, that any discussion of transformation will become meaningless unless it has an impact in what happens in the classroom. So this is why we are embarking on this. Because if you don't change, because the most damage occurs, what has happened in the number when we got into transformation, we started deploying people into key positions. People become vice chancellors, people becomes deans. But the damage of coloniality happens in the classroom. So having a black vice chancellor or a female vice chancellor does not answer. And this is why this vice chancellor is among the few, and if not the only one, who participates in making sure that she knows what happens in Senate, she guides it, and she's also a thought leader. And you should take advantage of that you are in a space where there is intellectual deliberation, because that's what the university should be. It should be a place of intellectual deliberation. If it fails, that is its main project, the intellectual project of the university. That's why you have inaugural lectures, that's why you have workshops, so that we can have this form of deliberations. And of course, we are hoping that this year we are going to have a second international conference where we'll be looking at the curriculum closely. Now, what is it that we want to achieve this week? Today we want to talk a little bit about the contemporary politics of knowledge as day one. And tomorrow we would like to talk about how knowledge is colonized. Because if we don't understand how knowledge is colonized, we'll have little clue in how you can decolonize it. And the third one is the history of decolonization and the lessons for UZulu and the faculty of FCAL. Now, the last one is very important because, as I indicated, that the process of intellectual emancipation does not start with us. We are simply participating in a global movement that had started somewhere and a continental movement that had always been there, but it has not reached maturation where we can actually say now we have claimed our right to be. So that is what we one is wants to achieve in the next coming 3 days. The understanding of politics of knowledge, understanding how knowledge is colonized, and what the lessons that we can derive from the various struggles that have been put. Now, I'll start by going straight into the context. And it starts first with the Ngugi wa Thiong'o and many other people, doctors will tell you that the prescription of the correct cure is dependent on the rigorous analysis of the reality. Let me put it differently by way of giving an example. If I've got a headache and you give me a medication that deals with arthritis, that is still medication, but it do not solve my headache. It might even worsen it. So the proper description of the problem is very important before you can talk about the cure. And even then, there are a number of things, and this is very important. Professor Moyo, when I was in defense, we had to ask the question, what type of military defense do we need in the democratic South Africa? Because under apartheid, we were a military state. In almost every corner of the provinces, you'll find a military base. But we're trying to create a new dispensation. So we had to ask that, yes, you have to have the military, but what type of military should you have? And among other things, we came up with the 4 A's. First, we invoked the language of doctors, so that the medication that you prescribe must be appropriate, that it must be able to answer the problem. So we then ask ourselves what would be the form of the appropriate military system. So the notion of appropriate is very important. The next question that we needed to ask ourselves is whether it is adequate to deal with the challenges that we face as a people. In the same way that a doctor will give you a Panado, but they will not give you only one. Will probably give you 4 or 5 and say take them for a number of days, because the medicine must also be adequate. Because if you get less, you may not be able to solve your problem. So that was the second A of the solution. Then the third one was whether it is affordable. So you could have a number of medical interventions that may address the problem. But what is important is also whether you can afford it. So in dealing with that, we have to ask that when people give us a prescription of the military wear, whether we can afford it. And you know that we end up buying some weapons that we do not even need. So effectively, we didn't answer the question properly about the affordability. So even when we talk about finding a solution, we must also apply what the doctors try to prescribe to say, is it appropriate? Is it an adequate intervention to the challenges? And what does it mean? Can you afford it? And then we must also revisit our problem. Our problem was well articulated by Ian Smith. You remember him. He said, I will say colonialism is a wonderful thing. It spread civilization to Africa. Before it, they had no written language, no will as we know it, no school, no hospital, not even normal clothing. By the way, Ian Smith was Prime Minister of Rhodesia, where Professor Moyo comes from. So if you need more elaboration of that, he might be able to help. And of course, if you look at the dictionary meaning of colonialism, the Merriam-Webster dictionary puts it as the policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, occupying it with settlers, and exploiting it economically. That is actually one form of colonialism. There's the Merriam-Webster must actually know that there are also there's a colonialism that did not express itself with settlers. Actually, in Africa, there are only about 5 countries where there was settler colonialism. That's why in South Africa we talk about the colonialism of a special kind, because the colonialists remained. So there's actually this definition needs to be buttressed also by a real historical description. But nonetheless, it's the whole notion of acquiring full or partial control and exploiting is a part of colonialism. But there are also other better description that looks at it as both a historical and ideological construct. And of course, here it comes down to that its main features included genocide, exploitation, domination, and repression. And in the world of knowledge, we also talk about epistemicide. We talk about linguicide. Hence, we talk about the need for epistemic freedom. So it's very important that when you talk about decolonization, you must also understand what colonialism was about. Because if you don't understand that, you may not be able to have a proper prescription. But there are others who are also clear. Colonialism was a death project. It decided who will live. It decided how they will live and where. I mean, if you think of even other forms of it, the slavery. I mean, the first part of the colonial expansion started in the 17 and 1800 when Europeans left and went to the Americas and killed people there. So what you had was a surplus of Europeans, a surplus created by the social and economic crisis in Europe. And they went there and they killed, the same as they did in Australia. So that was the first. Then there's a second one, which came later into the continent, which that one did not involve so much as settling. It was simply exploitation. It was a surplus of not the people, not Europeans going there. It was a surplus of capital that was now used to expand European capitalism. So there are 2 types of colonialism that took place. So when we talk about this granular, definition. And some people have referred to colonialism as a form of settling. But as we know in Africa, there was nothing settling. It was deeply unsettling for us. It did a number of things. One, disrupted cultural identity and the sense of belonging of those being colonized. It attempted to separate them from their core values and beliefs, to break them to the will of the colonizer. It imposed its own values. This much we know. That we need to understand that it was not only about acquiring of land, it was also an enforcement and through violence. I mean, if you read the Record of the Earth, I'm going to talk about that. It's important to understand that aspect of violence that sustained colonialism. And the other thing that one of the impacts also, before I go to that, is the most important thing that people like Fanon will talk about is that it was not only an occupation of, but it was also your life was disfigured in the hope of final destruction. Under these conditions, the individual's breathing is an observed and an occupied breathing. It's a combat breathing. That's why in America, black people talk about I can't breathe because of that impact. So far from it being settling, it was very unsettling. But there's a Professor Eke who did a very interesting book, article or a paper. It's actually a paper, inaugural lecture on colonialism and the social structure. It's a very interesting where he tries to point that it defined life in Africa. It was unsettling to that extent, and the effect was what you call, it was an epoch. It was not simply an issue of it being episodic. The Ibadan School of Thought teach what you call a postgraduate diploma in education, something like that, But it shows how serious you are. So if we are serious about this, then this will also be something that's a requirement, because it's really about a paradigm mind shift, so that when you approach the discipline wherever you are, you approach them with that what Professor Moy was talking about. You call it insurgent mind. It's insurgency, both insurgency and resurgency. You need to be able to have certain questions that you ask, that if you don't ask those questions, you may not even be knowing that you are actually changing. And part of the curriculum change would be, what are the type of questions that you must ask? I mean, for instance, what I do these days, and thanks to my brother, it was to say, when he looks at the book, I mean, he's no longer alive, he used to look at who is the author and who gets referenced. And if he finds that it is the same old people, he doesn't bother, because he knows what they think. I mean, it's the same as, I have another friend who lives in Cape Town, who was in exile and happened to end up in the US. And in their class, they had to go to a country to study. And all the classmates were clear. They were selecting a place in Africa, Mali, South Africa, and all that. And then he said, no, he wants to go to Paris. And the professor was confused. He says, well, what are you going to do in Paris? He said, no, but he said we must choose a place to study the people. I want to go and study white people. The professor had no problem in everybody going to Africa to study Africans. But because white people are never the ones who are studied, it was perplexing for the professor. And he put it, no, I want to study white people, But of course, what it did was to create as a form of what do you call it, the cognitive dissonance, because it is not white people who are studied, it is us who should be studied. I mean, in the same way that who was W. Du Bois was asked the question, and he actually says in his book, which is a must read too, Souls of Black Folks. In it, he talks about that when he's with his white colleagues, they look at him and they says there's this question that they want to ask, but they don't know how to ask it. So they try to struggle to find a polite way of asking. And the question is, how does it feel to be a problem? And this is where we come in as Black people, that we've always been a white man's burden, where we are a problem. So this Zenzele was trying to turn it around and to now coming to us, the politics of knowledge, of education knowledge, was much more clearer than in any other place. At least Verwoerd was bold to tell us that when I have control of native education, I will reform it so that natives will be taught from childhood to realize that equality with Europeans is not for them. There is no place for him, the black child, in European society above the level of certain forms of labor. What is the use of teaching a Bantu child mathematics when it cannot use it in practice? Most people have concentrated on only one part. They have not seen the hidden meaning. I mean, that is the most profound statement that Verwoerd was made. But that statement shaped the behavior of black people as well. Let me park that before I come. Then he also said, we must take the implementation of separate development, which is apartheid, that no future government will ever be able to reverse it. That even when you have a new government, the same condition will prevail. Even when you have the constitution that you call the best constitution, the same conditions will prevail. And if you look at where we are today, Verwoerd was not so wrong in a sense of reversal. That the same condition, same people who were in the squatter camp in 1994 are still in the squatter camp today. The same people who constitute the most of the unemployed are still the same. Same people who are still the same. Same people who are landless are still the same, with the best constitution in the world. That's what Verwoerd was saying. But what you're also saying in that statement, which very few people have actually captured, is that is to make the African to realize that equality with Europeans is not for them. Now, the profundity of that statement lies in how it shaped the behavior of black people. What black people have actually done as a result of that is to spend time trying to prove that they can be equal to whites. So if the white folks study Shakespeare, they make sure they study Shakespeare. If the white people study locust, they sure they're going to study locust, to show that but what it does, it makes be entrapped in a white agenda. Whatever white people do, you do it so that you can prove Verwoerd wrong. But you never will prove them because the goalpost will change. I mean, I'll give you an example. Mahoba, one of the top immunologists this country has produced, with a PhD from Oxford, comes back from being invited to become a deputy vice chancellor. He starts talking about Africans. With his education, they challenge whether he understands something called standards. And a person telling him that only has an honors degree, but that person happens to be white. The whiteness enables him to be able to look down on him. And what we do when we take over, the first thing that African did was to rush to white spaces, white universities. The best of the leadership of this country, they take their children to white spaces because they want to prove Verwoerd wrong. And you know what they do? They even fund those institutions more than they fund black universities. But what people did not realize is that aspect of Verwoerd of psychological entrapment. So the new government is doing what apartheid has actually done. I mean, I was in government when we built what you call it, the houses. The apartheid regime made sure that the black houses are so far away from the cities. The black government has done exactly the same. So go and look at the funding formula and look at who gets billions of money. It is not black universities, but it goes back to Verwoerd. And when you ask these guys, why are you doing it? They say, oh, but UCT has a medical school. Who said that the Zululand does not want a medical school? So you use the same logic that apartheid used of whiteness being superior. Now you use it against your own people. Because all we do, we have taken our kids there. People fail to understand how profound Verwoerd was. They simply look at Verwoerd as simply racist. But Verwoerd was probably the most brilliant person who understood human psychology and human behavior. And right now we're still suffering from that psychological entrapment. And if my memory serves me well, Professor Kreling, he had a PhD in psychology, didn't he? But it's good to study also the Verwoerd. It's a very interesting study of the mess and the damage that it continues to wreak even today. But anyway, the long and short of it is that what Verwoerd says and Makgoba was putting is what is common between a judge, a doctor, a politician, a policeman, a priest, a journalist, or editor, and the ordinary citizen is the type of education they received or the curriculum that provided the foundation of their education. This is also one of those things that is a paradox. Ordinary white folks don't think that they're inferior to a black person. You know, like they say in the United States, what's a black person with a degree, with a PhD? When you ask a white person, say, oh, he's a nigger, you know. So your PhD does not solve your problem, you know. So that's why that person at Wits with an honors could tell Makgoba about standards. So that's what happens with what the psyche of oppression, colonialism, that they can't even help themselves. And of course, black people themselves will also denigrate those black people who have gone to school. If you are educated, the most abused person in South Africa is a black professional. You know, the strange thing that sometimes the greatest abuse I've received have been from black people. You know, you'd sometimes hear white people calling you, say, Professor, with due respect, I disagree with you. And I can live with that. But black people, all they get on the phone is a stream of vulgar words describing the anatomy of my mother, you know, just because they disagree with you. Because they don't expect you to be an expert. So that is a challenge that Verwoerd had given us, to even have an element of self-doubt, in the same way that the black government has a self-doubt about funding black institutions that were disadvantaged. So you are disadvantaged under apartheid, you are disadvantaged now. Even for all the talk that we talk about transformation, they're not putting money into it. And actually, the greatest insult, which you must read in our book, Universal Conversation, is also to think that we should be what is guided. Universities, they want us to get into partnerships, but when you look at those partnerships, you can see who's the junior. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you have gone to the best universities in the world. You know, I mean, there was a woman who was from one university in the Free State, and she had never been to any other university other than in that university. And those are people who have to check on us about standards. And I was saying to her, you know, some of us have been to every corner of this world, not only as students, but as teachers. And you've never been outside the province. This is the first time you come to. But the arrogance which they you know, but again, it goes back to what Mahoba says, that's what colonialism does. But at the same time, there's a flip side of it. It's also black people themselves. You see, we must understand the space of the colonized and the colonized. The colonized get also to way accept. I mean, a friend of mine who got a job to run one of the, in the 80s as an engineer qualified from the US, he was given a senior position at ESCOM. And the people at that time who were reporting to him were largely white. But if he tried to give orders to the black folks, they will not even respond to him. So he had to go through a white person to give orders so that they can be done. Because he understood that Umlungu is the only one that they can accept orders from. He says that what changed is that one day he fired Umlungu. And that only then did they realize that he's got power. But again, what I'm saying that you need to also understand that the victims themselves accept their status of the space of coloniality. You have this I saw when I was a child, and I like giving this example because there's nothing that shows it much more than the mind that is imprisoned. I'll have one more slide, then I'll shut up, and we'll go to the next. When I was 7 years old, coming from school, I saw a group of able-bodied men standing in a queue. I mean, Americans call it a line. But it was not a bus station. It was not a taxi station. What is this line for? Then one of them angrily responded to say, no, they've been arrested. And as a child, I was looking for the policeman. There was no police. And then I was told that no, the police van was full. It has taken these Africans to the nearest police station, and it will come and collect the rest. Now, these people, even when they could run away, the police, the apartheid government had instilled such a fear of God in them that they were self-policing themselves. So if one goes, they will hold him that, we'll have to answer on your behalf. So that is how the mindset works. And that mindset, let me tell you, also works at universities. When you suggest a freedom, that things that you're talking about, they will pull you back to say, no, chief, that's not how we behave. You will talk about doubt, not here. If you have doubt, go outside there. You talk about here we have boundaries, disciplinary boundaries. So that behavior, that's why I'm giving this example to connect it to the notion of us having to be bold and courageous and understand that you will not only be fighting against those who, and here must understand that this is not a racial issue. Actually, I'll tell you, need to grapple with shifting the terrain are people who don't look like you and me. It will be your own people who will find fault with you because you have not done so. But if somebody else who do not look like them does it, say, oh, amazing. Amazing. You know? So we need to get into grips with this challenge that we're facing. That we are going to be fighting against professions. We're going to be fighting with the sponsors. You're going to be, because what they do, people, and don't blame them. They know what works, and people, there's a comfort in the familiar. There's a discomfort. Even during slavery, if you read in slaves, people, when they're told that there's freedom, that there's no better place like here. You want to run. Say, where to? You know? So you become so comfortable in a state of unfreedom that you become afraid of freedom. Even when the state of unfreedom does not even work for you. So, colleagues, I'm harassed by the program director.
Discrepancy. If you are giving us 10,
then
we pay according to the 10.
I would like to leave it here, but before you have question and answer, there are other materials that I would like to touch on, but you can stand the harassment up to a point. So let me leave here, then we'll proceed and take the next part of what the VC took some of my space. Thank you very much.
You can speak.
One more time, colleagues, let's do this. Professor Siepe never ceases to amaze me with his depth, with his skill, and with how he does his thing. And as I told him the last time, I will have to go and speak to that. Professor, did you not go to Harvard those days when the community used to raise money for the child to go to school? I assume. We have to demand a refund for the physics you went to study, because what you're doing here is not physics. I'll speak to the community. Thank you so much, Prof. That voice wasn't mine. It was coming online. I think it was one of the colleagues online. Let me address the colleagues online. Thank you for your patience. We have adjusted the schedule slightly, and that's what we almost always do. I want to give you the assurance we are not doing this flippantly, we are not being irreverent, we are responding to the demands of the program, and sometimes it happens as we go. That's what we are doing. We do not disregard the fact that we prepared this program and that you are there. We had to make that extra time available for the Vice Chancellor's address, and I don't think we have regretted it or that we will regret it. We now are at 10:45 approximately. We will take the tea break until 11. On the schedule it says 30 minutes. We'll make it 15. And during the tea break, I'll put my heads together with Prof. Siepe and Ms. Makani, our program manager, the project manager, to see, and Prof. Krelin as well, and Prof. Moyo, to see how we can carry on in the remainder part. We will have to come back to do the question and answer. We may have to go beyond 14:30. It's just a proposal, but we'll try not to. We'll try to keep that boundary. It's one of the boundaries we may not want to cross, but we'll make some adjustments so that we do the most we can. But thank you again so much, Prof. Siepe. Thoughts on freedom remind us of Paulo Freire, who says we should see how education can be a practice of freedom rather than unfreedom. Thoughts about the military state, the military bases, the policing everywhere. But we are talking about epistemological and knowledge boundaries and some psychological boundaries as well, which we place on ourselves or which come from the ways in which we have been socialized. And the talks of the partnerships as well, very, very profound. We had one meeting, two meetings. I'm sorry, colleagues. Colleagues in this faculty, you participate in the Erasmus program, don't you? Do colleagues in FCAL participate in Erasmus? Or is it just the...
Yes, we did.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes, we did.
Fantastic. At one of our faculty meetings, please, nobody should tell my dean. Somebody asked the question what Erasmus is. That question is still hanging. So much for the partnerships we engage in. It's supposed to be a partnership, but we don't know what Erasmus is. We don't know who Erasmus is, or what it is, or what that program was founded for. And once we had a visitor from Sweden, and we were at the Old Vices Lodge, you know that beautiful place. And this young lady summoned all of us, all our senior professors. We sent her out. She sat at the head of the table. And I just started wondering whether it would be possible for my colleague, I don't mean it in a negative way, Nelson, to go to a university somewhere and sit at the head of the table and summon all the professors at that university around the table and be presenting this partnership. Okay, thanks, colleagues. That's my rant. We'll end there. We have tea. If it's possible, grab tea and get back to the room. We'll proceed at 11, and we'll see how we can merge the question and answers with the roundtable reflections. Thank you very much. Thanks, colleagues. Colleagues online, please begin to prepare also to participate. We're opening it up when we come back at 11. Thank you. That message was supposed to... Is there a chat? Yes. Colleagues, there's tea and it's free. Where's the chat? Yeah. Okay, I'll take it when they come back. Oh, that's excuse. There's nothing I can do about that. Yeah, these are people getting an excuse. Yeah. They can.
Okay, let me just, okay, let me switch off the
Mr. Twala. Yes, it's 11. Okay, it's 11 o'clock in Johannesburg. It's 11 o'clock in Durban. It's 11 o'clock in Kwadlange as well. It's 11 o'clock in the Premier Hotel in Richards Bay. And so we will proceed. The colleagues are making their way back in. Colleagues online, thank you for your patience. Thank you for being there. And here is a status report for the program. We are going to have the facilitator, the lead facilitator, back on for 15 minutes. That will take us to about 11:15, 11:16. Thereafter, we will take the... Okay, now there's a bit of a challenge. We might have to move our lunch for colleagues in person. We might have to move our lunch until after the discussions. We agreed to have both interactive sessions together. So the first interactive session is the roundtable reflections. We have agreed to merge it or bring it to dovetail into the breakaway sessions. And the suggestion is we have one session in the room, since the people in the room are not, the number is not so much. That has complications for participation anyway. Sometimes when the rooms are smaller, then you have more participation, but we are going to hope that we'll have more participation together in this room. So something I didn't quite envisage is that we have the lunch in between. It's like a big river we have to cross. So we will have, let's proceed with the speaker now. After that, we'll merge the roundtables and the breakaway sessions, and lunch will have to move back a bit, most likely till 1 o'clock. Lunch will move back to 1 o'clock. We'll take our main facilitator now until 11:17. His 15 minutes are sacrosanct. We're not going to steal anything from that, and then we'll proceed from there. Thank you, colleagues. Thanks, Prof.
Let me go to the program to share the screen.
Yeah, colleagues, just to finish off on the issue of colonialism. And as I said, in simple terms, the colonial project was very brutal. And the central aspect of it was the dehumanization of people. By dehumanization, it means it was about putting people in terms of categories. You had those who were human, and you had those who were subhuman, and you had those who were not human at all. And there's a reason why it was necessary to dehumanize, because it had to address a contradiction within the Western system. And this is something that I asked when I was in the US, trying to understand when people talk about freedom, they talk about liberty, talk about equality. But that how do you begin to justify enslavement? How do you begin to justify ill-treating people, putting them in conditions of squalor, putting them in pigsties, treating them like animals, like, black women who were enslaved. They will get black men to impregnate them for the purpose of slavery. And there will also be some genetic engineering where they get the huge, well-built females and men, just like people do with breeding. They will do that. But they had to explain to themselves that how do you become a land of liberty, freedom, and all these things, and yet you treat people like that. So they had to justify for themselves that we're not dealing with people. And you find that also in the Constitution of the United States, that the African people, African Americans, were 3/5 of human beings. So it allowed them to treat them like that, because in their mind they are no longer people, therefore they could justify this level of ill treatment. But also the dehumanization also had an effect on the people who were dehumanized, because they then began also to start seeing themselves in that light, where they start asking for less. So you need to understand that it was necessary, but it also went to destroying black people's sense of being. They were now in a state of perpetual doubt. They couldn't speak with authority on anything. Even today, when an African talks about their own lives, they end up almost in a space of doubt, as if somebody is going to say that's not true. So the dehumanization served to relieve them of that responsibility of how do you deal with this and still talk about the land of the free when others are slaves. So they had to be called that, no, they're subhuman. And on top of that, you also had universities that were implicated. I mean, Harvard is also one of those. A number of universities are paying, some of them have shown willingness to pay reparations for what they did. There were people who were doing what they call they call it a scientific enterprise to prove black people are not like white people, that they're not human, So Harvard is implicated just like other universities are implicated. If you look at the Tuskegee experiment, they could only subject that to African people, Even some of the people that we hold dear, our friend in physics, the first people who had to be killed by electric chair were black people. They had to experiment. It was a physicist who went to say, no, I've got a better way of killing these people, So they were in the death. So it was a death project. And so we should not try to massage colonialism. We must say, put it for what it is, And the notion that you have, we'll deal with how knowledge was also colonized, because these so-called claims of scientific inventions, you'll find that those were happening all over the world. They were not only happening in Europe, but we'll deal with it. But the most important thing is that there were institutions, universities, that were implicated in the dehumanization of people of African descent. That is a very important element. The actors that He says, what colonialism does is cause an identity crisis about one's own culture. That's the experience of African people. And I talked about what Mahoba was saying. And I have a friend who, well, it's amazing that how lived experience shapes people's thinking. This friend of mine, who happens to be white, has a son who was 8 years old, and these are very close friends. And she comes to me one day, very excited about her son. Says, my son is very entrepreneurial. I said, oh, he is. Says, tell me. And I said, no, he came to me with this idea that he's going to start an internet cafe. Oh, I said, no, that's good. And, he's going to employ Andres. So Andres is a black man who works for his father, for the son's father. Andres is minding his own business. He does not know that in the future, this 8-year-old son is going to employ him. But Andres knows that as he grows up, he's going to employ black people. Because that is his lived experience, that black people are there to serve him. And I'm sure Andres would have been very happy to know that there's a future in employment. He'll probably doubt whether he'll still be alive. But the fact that the job is guaranteed would have been good news to him. But this is what colonialism does. Because that's a type of education, that is the type of impressions that they get. But also we participate in that.